Hi, everybody. Welcome to After Hours. I'm Bill Whittle. Well, you know, they say that you can judge yourself by your enemies. And that's true enough, I guess. You can judge yourself by your allies as well. Our guest this evening is Wayne Allyn Root, who's got an incredible radio program. We've had a chance to bump into each other a few times. I've been a guest on his show. And he's a voice of reason and sanity out there in this swirling pop culture of putridity and graceless greed and all the rest of it. Wayne, how are you? It's good to see you. How have you been?
I'm good. I'm really proud you described me as common sense because I'm an SOB, a son of a butcher. And so no matter where I go in life, I'm Ivy League educated, Columbia University, just sent my daughter to Harvard. She graduated Harvard University. But we'll always be the family of a butcher and the grandson, by the way, of a butcher. And my daughter from Harvard, therefore, is the granddaughter, a great-granddaughter of a butcher. And that's the way I think, and that's the way I taught my kids to think. We got to save the middle class because America is the middle class. And Democrat liberal ideas and policies and agenda destroy the middle class. Yeah, that's right,
Wayne. And you're doing some pretty good butchering yourself out there of some of these inflated lunatics. Let's start with talk radio and the power of that. The left has always been mystified by talk radio and the success that it has among conservatives, and they tried to do, Air America, and fell flat on its face. What is it, do you think, about the conservative viewpoint that makes your radio show successful and talk radio in general?
Well, I've said it for years, by the way, and it sounds funny. It's kind of a joke and it's tongue-in-cheek, but it's totally true. The reason talk radio only works for conservatives, Bill, is that talk radio is a medium for your car, not for your home. It's not the boob tube sitting on your couch.
That's it.
It's your car, so people are listening going to and from work. That's why it's meant for conservatives. There are no liberals going to and from work. They're home watching cartoons and Jerry Springer waiting for their EBT cards, and they're watching TV. But conservatives are in the car with no time for TV, and they're listening to radio. That's why conservative talk radio works.
Yeah, our friend Evan Sayet was on the show talking about that, and he said that the difference between liberals and conservatives is that conservatives do things. And he has a really funny routine about that. So, yeah, I think that actually kind of makes sense. You're kind of pre-selecting an audience that's a little more... well, obviously, you're going to be more conservative if you're making things and the government's taking it away from you than you would be if you're not making anything and the government's giving it to you. You and I have a lot of interaction with our public and with the people we deal with. Does it surprise you? Because it surprises me just how amazingly more informed our side is compared to the left. I found that I could find the most rabid left-winger and flip them if I had 10 minutes, honestly.
Yeah, well, look, there's plenty of smart liberals. Let's not kid ourselves, but it's a different kind of smart.
Right.
In other words, I went to Columbia, and yet I found all the kids around me to be brilliant when it comes to being book smart, but they had zero common sense. So, liberals are kind of a very interesting mix. They're the people at the very top that go to Harvard and Stanford and Princeton and Dartmouth and Yale, etc. And they're brilliant when it comes to taking tests and being book smart. But none of them have ever earned a dime in the real world. They know nothing about money at all. They know nothing about what makes a business work or how you create jobs. They just know how to be smart in a book. And the book is usually written by Karl Marx. So that doesn't help you much. And then that's like the top 2%. And then the other 98% of liberals are just completely ignorant and don't have a clue about anything. And that's not Wayne Root talking. That's not conservative media talking. That's all the late night TV shows that mostly skewer conservatives. They hate conservatives and they love liberals. But when they do a man on the street interview, they prove the absolute stupidity and ignorance of the average man or woman on the street who's a liberal. They know nothing about anything. I remember last year when I think it was Jimmy Kimmel did a man on the street on Hollywood Boulevard, and they held up a picture of Joe Biden, and they asked every person walking on Hollywood Boulevard, who's Joe Biden? And nobody knew, but one guy said he's got to be a Republican politician because he's an old white man, so he must hate Obama. This is the ignorance of liberals. No one knows who the vice president of the United States for 8 years is, and the one who guesses because he's old and he's white, he must be a Republican. Unbelievable.
Yeah, Ronald Reagan said it's not that liberals are stupid, it's just that so much of what they know just isn't true. And that's really it. You can pack your head full of all kinds of information. And as you say, a lot of liberal knowledge is very deep but very narrow, and often in arcane subjects that don't really get to interact with the real world. One of my favorite sayings, Wayne, I don't know if you've heard this before, is that you ask a liberal about some kind of a problem, and they'll say, yeah, it works in practice, but will it work in theory? And that's really it, isn't it? Right? I mean, the idea that if you look at the Soviet, for example, the Soviet takeover of Russia, they had an actual chance for a real Republican representative democracy under Kerensky for 6 months. Then the Bolsheviks come in and steal power. But they described themselves as professional revolutionaries. They were intellectuals, and all of their discussions were: is he a Trotskyite or is he a Zinoviite? Is he a Leninist or is he a Stalinist? Everything is theory. Everything is just hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of building this little tiny model boat inside the bottle, right? And then whether that boat actually floats in the water is of very little concern to them.
Well, it floats in the water if a guy like you or me builds it, So that's the thing. They don't build anything. They don't make anything. They don't produce anything. They tax everything. That's the only thing liberals know how to do. But there's a couple ideas that came to mind from your example. First of all, I want to mention, when you mention Soviets and Trotskyites, what comes to mind is Bolsheviks.
Yeah.
And when I went to Columbia University, I graduated class of '83. All my classmates, Bill, in those days when there was no camera on them, they weren't famous, they were just college students, free to say what they really believed. They all said they bragged. They were communists, socialists, Marxists, and Bolsheviks.
Yeah.
They used that word. Today, when I get Columbia College today 4 times a year, tells me where all my classmates are and how they're doing in life, they're all members of the media or the government. And they used to be bragged that they were communists, socialists, Marxists, and Bolsheviks. That explains everything that's happened to America. The media and the government is filled with communists.
Yeah, and you can make a pretty compelling case that the Bolsheviks were worse than the Nazis in pretty much every way. Certainly in terms of their death count, they were worse. And we don't have that same kind of, nothing like that kind of vehemence and revulsion towards them. I think it's for 2 reasons. First of all, there are no pictures, right? I mean, the thing about the Nazi atrocities where you could see the death camps, you could see the piles of bodies being shoved along with a bulldozer. Nobody saw the people being executed in the basement of the Lubyanka for whatever it was, 20 years, 6 at a time, shot in the back of the head. So there were no pictures. And needless to say, the left has always given the Soviets a pass because they're the pinnacle of left-wing ideology. Walter Duranty, as you probably know, was a reporter for the New York Times. He went to the Soviet Union and over time became completely aware of the fact that they were intentionally starving millions of these peasants, these kulaks who owned, maybe a slightly larger farm than everybody else. And he just simply came back and reported on what an incredible workers' paradise it was, because they're so blinded by ideology. They don't seem to have any moral code at all other than this ideology of a perfect world that is going to be here just as soon as we kill enough of the bad people.
Yeah, look, I just used the example of Venezuela,
Yep.
And nobody's talking about it in the media. There's very little. I'm sure you have, because guys like you and me recognize everything. We scan the news, we know everything going on, and we try and come up with stories that make our case. And so in the media, you don't see a word about Venezuela. Venezuela was literally the pride of Latin America,
Yep.
the most prosperous country in Latin America. And then a commie got a hold of Venezuela, a socialist. And Hugo Chavez took over, and after that, his handpicked successor was Maduro. I think it's Nicolas Maduro, if I remember correctly. But Maduro's in charge of Venezuela now. And they are dyed-the-wool socialist, Marxist, communists. And they destroyed the country to the point where everyone in the country is starving to death. That's not an exaggeration.
Not.
The entire country is starving to death, and there's a bridge between Venezuela and Colombia. And that one bridge, about 3-4 weeks ago, had like 20,000 people pushing and shoving, like in a bad situation at a stadium where they could all be trampled and killed. They were all trying to get to Colombia, and on the Colombia side were military with guns ready to shoot and kill them. They're starving to death. Bill, they raided the zoo, literally to eat the animals.
It's unbelievable.
That's what happens when you put socialists in charge. That's the road to serfdom. That's the road where Obama had America on. Thank God. I don't know if we've reversed it. I don't even think it's possible, but I think we've slowed it. Maybe we've halted it for a few years with Donald Trump. I don't know how far he'll get by reversing it, because they control all the lawyers, all the government, all the education system, and all the media. And that's a lot of institutions that decide what people are thinking and what direction people are going in the United States of America. So maybe all we could do is halt the slide temporarily, or maybe we can reverse it if Donald Trump gets a little momentum. But thank God, because if Hillary had won,
oh my God,
we were talking about the first 100 days of Hillary, Bill, this would be a disaster. It's over.
Yeah. I read that the average Venezuelan has lost 17 pounds, 19 pounds, something like that. That's an incredible across the population loss. And I wonder, Wayne, when you point something like this out to these self-described Bolsheviks and socialists, they'll say, well, they're not doing it right. Really? Well, what about the Soviet Union? Well, they didn't do it right either. Well, what about the Nazis? The Nazis aren't socialists. They're called the National Socialist German Workers' Party. I didn't name them. They did. What about the Chinese, 50 million dead? What about the Vietnamese massacres in Cambodia? And every single time they say that doesn't count, it doesn't count, it doesn't count, they're not doing it right. And don't you get to the point, Wayne, where after 150, 200 million people, you may start to come to the realization that it cannot be done right, that this is the logical outcome of taking everybody down and ruling through terror and arbitrary power? You'd think that after a while, I don't know, 10 million people maybe, they'd start to get the idea. But there's 200 million dead, and they're just still talking about how wonderful it all is going to be.